The mission was as simple as they come, at least on paper. Load up a convoy of heavily armored Humvees with medical and comms gear, deliver it to a FOB that was practically begging for it, and wait for the signature. I was the medic for 2nd Platoon, so I was responsible for all the medical supplies, while the platoon sergeant took charge of the comms kit. The convoy rolled out, everything set, but something didn't sit right. I'd stopped my platoon sergeant in the middle of loading the Humvee. "Think we should grab some extra ammo?" "Getting tight in here," I said, pointing to my ride. He looked at me like I'd asked for a second helping of brain juice. After a second, he turned to a soldier nearby. "You guys loading up extra ammo?" The guy shook his head. "Full up, Sarge." He looked back at me. "Take what you can, document. Never leave home without extra rounds." We chuckled, but I wasn't messing around. Ammo wasn't something you skimped on out here. We packed up, and once we were all ready, we climbed into our Humvees. 4 of them, loaded with enough gear to make a supply run seem like a war zone in its own right. We'd lost a few good men lately, and others were sidelined with injuries, so we didn't have our usual team. Just another day in the dusty hellscape that was Afghanistan. I had heard we'd pass near the valley, a nice little spot, but also the heart of darkness. The birthplace of the Taliban. We were prepared. Always prepared. Someone plugged in an old iPod, the screen barely lighting up. It started playing that damn Creedence song. "Turn that shit off." I snapped. "You're gonna jinx us." I wasn't kidding. That song was for combat, not for supply runs. The guy rolled his eyes, swapped it out for something else, 3 days grace, if I remember right. It was rock, and at least it kept our minds off the long stretch of desolate road ahead. This was the stretch the EOD kept a close eye on. It was the main road connecting our bases, but about halfway through, we'd veer off down a barely recognizable dirt path toward our new FOB. The orders were clear: keep an eye out for roadside bombs. Don't trust anything. Don't leave the road. Every one of us knew the drill. Too many of our guys had been taken out by hidden IEDs, buried in the rocky soil like ghosts waiting to strike. But I knew that the rocks and high ridges weren't just hiding bombs. They were hiding the things that could make you wish a bomb had taken you out instead. Around midday, we cracked open our MREs. I don't remember what I ate that day, but I'll tell you this, it wasn't the worst. You know how it goes. We joked, played some music, and for a moment, it almost felt like everything wasn't a never-ending countdown to disaster. Then the radio crackled. "Eyes up, men. We're heading off-road. Humvee 2, slow your pace. Humvee 1, stay ahead and observe. Report anything and everything. Over." That was mine. Our squad leader, sitting shotgun, looked over his shoulder. "If shit goes sideways, I better see one of you in that .50 cal." We didn't respond. The joke stopped. The music died. We were back in the moment now. The kind of moment where you can feel every grain of dirt, hear the wind rustling the dead trees, and notice the small things you usually ignore. A rock the size of a small child. A skeletal tree, as dry as the soil. A pothole in the road. We slowed down as we neared the edge of the rough path, the ground turning from barren dust to jagged rocks that scraped against our wheels. My eyes were locked on the ridges above us, scanning for movement. You never know who's watching, friend or foe. The whole landscape felt like a pressure cooker, every second ready to explode. The other Humvees rolled ahead, their engines growling low like some mechanical beast sniffing the air. I kept a steady hand on my rifle, fingers twitching over the trigger just in case. My mind raced through scenarios, each one more dangerous than the last. We were heading into a stretch of badlands where the rocks weren't just a natural hazard, they were a sniper's paradise. Then came the radio crackle again, breaking my focus for a split second. "Stay sharp. "We're coming up on the turn," said the squad leader, his voice steady, but I could hear the edge in it. The shit was about to get real. I glanced at my platoon sergeant, who gave me a curt nod. His hand hovered near the comms kit, just in case we needed to signal for backup. I was suddenly acutely aware of the low hum of my HUD, my neural link flickering as it updated my surroundings in real time. The virtual map in my vision was a faint glow against the darkening desert, outlining the path ahead, but no amount of tech could prep you for what was about to come. The convoy made the turn, heading off the main road and onto a barely visible trail that dipped into a hollow. It was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that you know is only temporary before chaos breaks loose. It wasn't long before I noticed something. At first, it was just a shadow moving against the ridge, too quick to be anything natural. Then, a glint of metal. A sniper's nest. Or worse, a set of enemy ambush points. Contact. I barked into the radio, my voice sharp as I snapped into action. Eyes on the ridge. Multiple targets. The radio erupted in static, and my heart rate spiked. The convoy wasn't going to stop, not yet, not unless we forced them to. I swiveled my turret to scan the horizon, and my mind immediately ran through the options. It was too soon for an airstrike, and there was no time for a full retreat. We were on our own. And then, just as I was about to warn the convoy to take cover, a low thud rattled through the ground, followed by an ear-splitting blast. I could feel it deep in my bones. The explosion had come from ahead, and the earth itself seemed to shake beneath the weight of it. The comms died for a moment, and all I could hear was the ringing in my ears. "Move, move, move." My platoon sergeant screamed, his voice cutting through the chaos. Before I could react, a second blast echoed through the hollow, this one closer. The shockwave slammed into us, sending the Humvee lurching forward, and everything around me went into hyperfocus. The world slowed, the sounds of screams and gunfire blending into a mechanical hum as adrenaline flooded my system. My vision blinked between the real world and the digital overlay of my HUD, which flickered erratically. A single command pulsed through my neural link: survive. The convoy was under attack. The world snapped back into focus as the convoy exploded into motion. My hands were a blur on the controls, eyes darting from the road to the ridges above, scanning for any signs of movement. We were boxed in, and it didn't take long to realize the full extent of the situation. The rocky outcrops weren't just for cover, they were traps. The insurgents knew the terrain, had it mapped out like a personal playground. They were ready for this, while we were just scrambling to catch up. The Humvee jerked under the force of another blast, the shockwave pushing us sideways. The driver fought to regain control as we veered dangerously close to a cliffside. I gripped my seat, feeling the familiar sense of panic clawing at my gut, but I shoved it down. No room for fear now. The radio crackled again, this time the squad leader's voice coming through distorted, but clear enough to hear. "Take cover. Move to defensive positions." His orders were quick, but they were too late. The enemy was already too close. I could see them now, figures darting between the rocks, their silhouettes barely visible against the midday sun. They were fast, using the terrain to their advantage, positioning themselves like a web that was closing in on us. The convoy was in a chokehold, and we had no choice but to fight our way out. I slapped my rifle into position, my breath steadying as I leaned out of the Humvee and scanned the ridgelines. There were too many of them. Not just fighters, these guys had military-grade gear. Drones whizzed overhead, their quiet hum sending a chill through me. Every move was being watched, every shot counted. "Humvee 2, keep moving. Don't stop." The command came from my squad leader, but it was more of a prayer than an order. We were sitting ducks if we stayed put. I swung the .50 cal around, the heavy gun jerking with each shot I fired. The recoil vibrated through me, but I didn't have time to care. Every burst of fire sent the enemy scattering, but for every one I dropped, 2 more took their place. They were relentless, like ghosts, fading into the dust and rock only to reappear somewhere else. A sharp cry echoed through the comms, and my stomach twisted. One of the Humvees had taken a hit. I couldn't tell who, but I saw the cloud of dust and debris as it spun out of control, its tires tearing into the dirt before flipping sideways. "Shit!" I yelled, snapping into action. "We've got casualties. Move! Move!" The platoon had already split into 2 groups, one going forward to clear the path, the other staying back to fight off the incoming fire. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse. Our position was rapidly becoming untenable. I had to get us out of here before it turned into a full-on massacre. I could hear the distant roar of a vehicle engine, and I knew it wasn't one of ours. The unmistakable sound of an armored truck, probably part of their backup. This was escalating fast. I glanced back at my platoon sergeant. His eyes were hard, set in the same determined look I knew all too well. He didn't say a word, but I could see the same thing in his eyes that I felt in mine: we had to fight, and we had to fight now. The comms suddenly burst into life again. "Air support's on the way. ETA 3 minutes." I nodded to myself, mentally counting the seconds. 3 minutes. That was a lifetime. Before I could relay anything to my squad leader, we had passed the spot without incident. The sky was clear, a flawless blue, and the sun burned down on the metal skeletons we were riding in. Every bump, every creak, every screech of rust was noted in my mind. You learn to notice everything when you're out there. "All right, men. We're keeping a good pace. Stay alert," came the order. I flinched. Was that movement? I whipped around in my seat, but saw nothing. The soldier next to me nudged me. "Doc, you good?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, though my throat felt dry as sand. "Humvee 1, report," crackled through the radio. The lead vehicle's voice came over the airwaves. "Nothing ahead. Spotted a few sheep back there. Anyone want to jump out and snag one?" Laughter filled the vehicle for a second. "No time for jokes," came the serious reply. "Roger that," came the answer back. As the radio fell silent, the sounds of the road and our vehicle's strained parts filled the cabin, when suddenly, everything went dark. A deafening explosion erupted, shaking the Humvee violently. The fireball that erupted sent the lead vehicle tumbling off the road, crashing through the air in a violent spray of metal and fire. Our Humvee screeched to a halt, and then, nothing. Blackness. If you've ever regained consciousness in the middle of chaos, you know the terror that comes with it. I woke up with my eyes wide, but it took a second for my mind to catch up. The sky seemed to move, or maybe it was me, I couldn't tell. The sounds were a torrent, bullets hitting metal, fires roaring, explosions all around, and screams piercing through the madness. Reality came rushing in, and I had no choice but to accept it. "Medic! Get the fucking medic!" A voice screamed from somewhere nearby. My vest was yanked, pulling me across the rough terrain, dragging me behind the twisted wreckage of a Humvee. 3 IEDs had gone off, one on the lead vehicle, one on ours, and one on the last, trapping us in the hellish chaos. Through the smoke and noise, I saw a familiar face, my squad leader's. His eyes were wild with fear, his voice thick with urgency. "Doc! Get the fuck up!" Panic flooded my mind. "We're under attack." My body shot to action. I staggered to my feet just as a rocket flew overhead, slamming into the ground with an earth-shaking explosion. I ducked as debris rained down. "Doc! He's hit!" My squad leader screamed over the chaos. I followed his eyes. Lying away from the wreckage, exposed to the enemy, was our driver. He wasn't moving. Blood was pooling beneath him, and I felt the bile rise in my throat. No time for fear. I grabbed my rifle and bolted toward him, not thinking about the bullets flying, the explosions rattling the ground. I dove to his side, trying to stay low, the harsh, searing pain in my chest a distant whisper. His leg was a mess, the blood pouring from it in a steady stream. I dragged him behind the nearest cover, my hands slick with his blood. Stop the bleeding. I thought to myself. Bullets were flying from every direction, but in this moment, it was just me and the wounded. I slapped a tourniquet on his thigh, working quickly. Please stay with me. I kept telling myself, but in my gut, I felt the cold grip of fear. I searched through my bag, desperate. I've lost too much gear, I cursed under my breath. Hang in there, brother, I whispered, my voice raw. Then I heard the shout again, louder this time. My squad leader was waving me over, and I saw the .50 caliber gunner returning fire, giving us the breathing room we needed. This is it, I thought. I need to get him back to safety. Just as I started to pull him back, the sniper's shot cracked through the air. I didn't even see it coming. 1 second, I was running, and the next, I was lifted off my feet and thrown to the ground. The world spun as the sniper round slammed into my sappy plate. The shock rattled my body, but I forced myself to breathe. Broken ribs, I thought numbly, please not a punctured lung. I gasped for air, and someone was dragging me back behind cover, their hands firm on me. Doc! Doc, a voice screamed. I gave a weak thumbs up, trying to stand, but another grenade landed nearby, and the explosion sent a shudder through the air. I watched in horror as one of our soldiers dove on the grenade. A deep muffled blast followed, and he fell still, a hero who saved all of us. My breath hitched. This was no longer just about survival, it was about keeping them alive. Move! Get to the wounded! I shouted, as the enemy's fire picked up again. The .50 caliber had jammed, and another soldier was desperately trying to clear it. I sprinted, pushing my body to the limit, knowing I couldn't stop. An explosion threw me sideways, and I crashed into a Humvee that was still standing. I scrambled to check the pulse of a soldier sprawled on the ground. He was alive, but barely. Blood was spilling out from a wound in his abdomen. I need something to seal it, I thought, but there was no time to think. I ripped off his shirt and saw the sucking chest wound, and I cursed under my breath. Don't have what I need. Then the .50 stopped firing. The Humvee was silent for a moment. A thud broke the silence. I rushed to the turret to find the gunner lying there, his shoulder almost gone. Doc! Help me! I don't want to die. He screamed, his voice full of panic. I pulled him into cover and applied a tourniquet to his shoulder. It was a hopeless task, but I did it anyway. I packed the wound with everything I had, gave him a dose of morphine, and left him there, trusting the other soldiers to help him as best they could. As I darted for the next cover, an RPG zipped past me, exploding in a cloud of debris. I couldn't breathe properly, the pain from my broken ribs making each gasp harder. My focus was slipping, but there was no time for that. I spotted the radio next, barely visible under a soldier's body, blood soaking everything around it. I jumped over the soldier, checked for a pulse, nothing. His jugular was severed, and I felt the weight of his loss sink deep into me. He was a friend. He was one of the good ones. And now he was gone. The anger rose up like a wave inside me. Can anyone work this fucking radio? I shouted, desperation rising in my throat. The soldier nearby just shook his head. I grabbed the radio and ran. I was too tired to care anymore, too hurt to think. But I had a mission. Doc. You hit? The sergeant first class asked, eyes wide in disbelief. I pressed the radio into his hands, breath coming in ragged gasps. Call, backup, I mumbled, then collapsed, my back slamming against a Humvee wheel. And then I heard the scream. Medic. We've got another hit. Another voice. Another soldier in pain. I staggered to my feet, but my legs were barely working. I can't stop now. The world spun again, and I collapsed once more, gasping for air, my chest burning. Everything hurt. I woke up hours later, the sound of gunships blasting salvo after salvo into the ridgeline filling my ears. Backup had arrived, and the guy next to me was still alive. "Shit, Doc. I thought you were dead," he stammered. I waved him off, trying to shake the fog from my brain. "Shut the hell up," I groaned as I slowly pushed myself up, peeking out from cover. A Bradley was strafing the ridgeline, and men were pouring out from the back, rushing toward us. The whole ordeal had lasted about 3 hours, but it felt like a lifetime. We lost 2 men, and 6 others were injured to varying degrees. When the CaseVac chopper touched down nearby and soldiers rushed to collect the wounded, my squad leader helped me to my feet. "Go," he shouted. But I pushed him off. "Fuck that." I grunted, but my legs gave way, and I collapsed. Without hesitation, he picked me up in a firefighter's carry and hauled me all the way to the helicopter. "See you back there," he shouted as he ran back into the chaos. I watched the few remaining fighters get wiped out by hellfire and gunfire. By the time I was on the gurney, I had passed out again. I woke up in a hospital bed, my chest covered in dried blood, my body aching from the punishment it had endured. I must have shifted or made some noise, because my commanding officer's voice came out of nowhere. "Holy shit, you're awake." Then the voice of my platoon sergeant joined in, "You motherfucker." I turned my head with a groan of pain. My chest was a mess, bruised black, purple, and yellow. No punctured lungs, but 5 broken ribs, Doc, the sergeant first class said, sounding almost impressed. "You have no fucking idea what you just did, do you?" my commander asked. I smacked my dry lips and coughed. "Sorry," I muttered. "Sorry." The sergeant first class practically yelled. "You crazy bastard, you saved our asses out there." The commander placed a hand on his shoulder to quiet him. "Doc, get some rest. We'll talk when you're good to go, alright?" I nodded and shut my eyes, too exhausted to keep them open. My mind kept drifting, unable to recall much about how or why I was here. All I could remember was loading up the convoy that morning. I guess that's what several concussions will do to you. A few days later, I was finally up and moving around again. When I walked into my quarters, the whole room erupted in applause. I froze in shock, not sure how to react. My squad leader rushed over and threw his arms around me. Pain shot through me, and I shoved him off. "Watch it," I groaned. He laughed, oblivious to my discomfort. "He's back, boys. Get this man a fucking beer." The whole room roared with laughter. I took the beer, even though I didn't drink. I set it aside, sitting down on my bunk. "What the hell happened?" I mumbled, still groggy. "You seriously don't remember?" someone asked. "Holy shit, Doc." The guys gathered around, each one telling their version of what happened the past 24 hours. Bits and pieces came back, but most of it was a blur, a chaotic fog in my mind. I lay back, eyes closed, and let them recount the ordeal. The sergeant slapped my shoulder. "Thank you, document. We would have been fucked without you," he said. "I know you're the newbie, but today, you're a goddamn rock star." A chant started, "Doc. Doc. Doc." It grew louder until the whole room was cheering. I chuckled bitterly, still in pain, but grateful that most of my guys made it home. I still see the faces of those we lost, the radio operator who cracked jokes, the guy from Kentucky who loved spicy food and had a family waiting back home. I keep their pictures in a special pocket of my vest, but it's not just to remember them. It's a constant reminder of my failure. I couldn't save them. And I'll never forget that. I talked to the chaplain once, after returning from a patrol. "Doc, no, you're not religious, but this, keeping those pictures to punish yourself, it's not honoring them," he said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "They're with the Lord now, looking down on you. Learn to live with the loss in a way that helps you grow. Keep their pictures, but use them to empower you, not to hurt yourself." I gave an awkward smile, but I understood. I still use those pictures as self-punishment. It's how I cope. I failed them, and that's the worst wound I've ever sustained. My commander told me he'd submit the paperwork for a Bronze Star, with AV device, and a Purple Heart. I agreed, though reluctantly. I didn't want medals or accolades. I wanted my friends back. But I knew, in that moment, what I had signed up for. Sometimes, the weight of survivors' guilt is unbearable. Why did I make it out while they didn't? Those are the worst days. But I try to remind myself, they were the real heroes. The ones we should never forget. The days following the ambush felt like a haze. The adrenaline that had once kept me sharp and alert now seemed to drain from me with each passing hour. At first, I didn't want to acknowledge it. I told myself it was just the aftershock, that it was normal to feel like this after a fight. But deep down, I knew something had changed inside me. It was a change I wasn't sure I was ready for. The days were long. I spent most of them locked away in my quarters, trying to piece together the fragments of the battle. The memories were like shards of glass, painful to touch, hard to hold on to. I kept seeing their faces, my guys. They were everywhere. Even in the quiet moments, I could hear their voices, their laughter, their shouts. It was as though they were still out there, fighting, just out of sight. The chaplain stopped by a couple of times, but I wasn't in the mood for his words of comfort. I didn't want anyone telling me that I should move on, or let go, or that my brothers were now in a better place. I knew they were gone, but the gaping hole they left behind wouldn't be filled with prayers or kind words. No, this wound ran deeper. It would take more than time to heal. It wasn't just the loss that haunted me, it was the guilt. The brutal, suffocating guilt. I had been the one to survive. I had been the one who made it out of that hellhole, and now I was left to carry the weight of their memory. The questions never stopped. Why me? Why was I the one to make it back while they were left behind? What had I done differently? I had nothing to offer in return, no explanation that made any sense. They were heroes, every single one of them, and I was the guy who was still breathing. I couldn't shake the images. The radio operator's face, full of life one moment, and gone the next. The Grenade casualty, who had barely spoken a word to me but whose name I would never forget. They were like ghosts now, forever etched in my mind. I found myself talking to them, sometimes out loud, sometimes just in my head. I asked them why they hadn't made it back. What had I missed? What could I have done differently? I thought back to that moment, the moment when everything changed. When the first explosion went off, the shock that rattled my bones, the deafening roar that drowned everything else out. I had acted on instinct, moving quickly to treat the wounded, to keep them alive. But it wasn't just my training that had kicked in. It was something else, something primal. I didn't stop. Not even when the shrapnel sliced through me, not even when the world around me blurred with smoke and blood. Somehow, I kept going. I kept pushing. I remember shouting orders to the men, directing them to cover, keeping the wounded calm as best I could. But my thoughts were scattered. I couldn't focus. I didn't want to think about what was happening. I couldn't afford to. But now, in the quiet moments, I replayed it all, the chaos, the pain, the confusion. I wondered if it was my fault. If I had failed them somehow. The platoon had been shaken, but we moved on. That's what soldiers do. You put one foot in front of the other, day after day. But the truth was, we were all haunted. Some of the guys handled it better than others, but I could see it in their eyes. Everyone was carrying something. Some just buried it deeper than others. Me? I couldn't bury it. It gnawed at me, constantly, until I was left with nothing but a sense of emptiness. One night, a week after the ambush, I found myself sitting in a corner of the mess hall, nursing a drink I didn't even want. The others were talking, laughing, but I couldn't join in. I wasn't part of that world anymore. Not the same way. As I stared into my cup, the sound of a chair scraping across the floor broke through my thoughts. It was my squad leader, Sergeant Jacobs. He sat down beside me, his face worn and tired. I could tell he wasn't here to make small talk. "You doing all right, Doc?" he asked, his voice low. He wasn't looking at me, but I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. I shrugged. "Yeah. I'm fine." I hated how automatic those words sounded. I wasn't fine. None of us were. But it was easier to say nothing, to pretend. He stayed silent for a moment, taking a long sip from his own drink. "You know, you saved a lot of lives out there," he finally said, his voice quieter than usual. "I don't think any of us will ever forget that." I didn't respond at first. I wasn't sure how to. "It wasn't just me," I said finally. "We all did what we had to do. I was just the guy with the medical kit." Jacob shook his head. "No. You kept us alive, document. You didn't just patch up wounds. You kept us going. You kept us focused when all hell broke loose. And I don't think you'll ever realize just how much that means." I looked up at him then, meeting his gaze for the first time. "It didn't feel like enough," I said quietly. His expression softened, but he didn't try to offer any more comforting words. He knew better. "Just, don't forget. We're all in this together. We all came back from that, for better or worse. We'll figure it out. Together." I didn't know if I believed him, but I nodded anyway. It was the only thing I could do. We all had our battles to fight, our demons to face. Theirs were just more visible. Mine were internal. But that didn't make them any less real. The days bled together in the weeks that followed. The scars, physical and emotional, lingered. I kept my head down, focused on the work at hand, but the memories never left me. I started seeing the chaplain more often, but not for spiritual guidance. I needed something else. I needed to talk, to let someone hear what was going on inside my head. We had long conversations, most of them me rambling and him listening. He never judged, never pushed. It was strange, but in those moments, I felt like I was finally able to share the weight of the grief I was carrying. But there were days when the darkness threatened to overwhelm me. Days when the guilt felt unbearable. Those were the days I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering why I was still alive. One evening, I sat on the edge of my bed, the pictures of my fallen brothers in my hand. I didn't know what to do with them. Part of me wanted to let them go, to move on, but the other part couldn't. It felt like abandoning them all over again. I closed my eyes, whispered their names, and put the pictures back into the pocket of my vest. Maybe someday, I'd be able to honor them properly. But for now, I had to keep going, even if it felt like I was walking through hell every day. The mission had been a turning point, a moment that had changed me in ways I couldn't fully understand. But one thing was certain, I would carry the memory of my brothers with me always, in whatever form that took. And no matter how long it took, I would find a way to honor them, not with medals or plaques, but by living, by doing the work they didn't get the chance to finish. Because I couldn't forget. And I would never stop fighting.